Well, welcome back everybody to the University of Idaho and University of Wyoming Extension Sheep and Goat webinar series. This is a webinar series that we do once a week on Thursdays live, and then we post all of the webinars to our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, which is the University of Idaho Extension Livestock channel on YouTube, and Facebook at UI Sheep and Goats. And we also are collaborating with the University of Wyoming Sheep Program. So that's at UW Sheep on Facebook. I'm Melinda Ellison. I'm the University of Idaho Extension Sheep Specialist. And Carmen Wilmore is also going to be a speaker today along with myself. And she's a University of Idaho Extension educator in Lincoln County. And Whit Stewart is not with us today, but he's your third host for this webinar series, and he's the University of Wyoming Extension Sheep Specialist. So today, Carmen and I are going to visit with you guys about equipment that you're going to need for lambing and kidding. So we'll just go ahead and jump right in. So just to start us off on the right page, obviously, the number one thing when it comes to lambing and kidding and having the equipment you need is being able to make sure that you know when your animals are sick or not behaving normally. And so I just wanted to pop this one up for you guys to have just some physiological measures that would be normal for your sheep and goats. And luckily, this is one place that sheep and goats kind of overlap pretty well. So in adults, you want to see a temperature of 102 to 103. That would be normal. Lambs and kids are going to vary a little bit more, 101 to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. They will breathe 10 to 30 breaths per minute. So you can just watch that to count those. And a heart rate 70 to 90 beats per minute. So the reason that we start with this is because two of my most used tools in my operation with my sheep are my stethoscope and my thermometer. So a rectal thermometer works well for sheep and goats. So these are the two pieces of equipment that I would recommend all day long, just to make sure that you really do understand where your animals are at. And if they are outside of these parameters, there's a lot of things that you can do yourself, but you also can provide this information to your vet when you call them anytime that you need help, and that'll help them better understand what they're coming to help you with. So fecal production is another one. Anytime that your critters are not producing feces, that's not a good sign. And then of course, just normal sheep and goat behaviors. Sometimes it's important to just go watch and understand what they should be doing. And if they're not acting normally, then you know that they're sick. So that's just to jump us off the first couple of things that we would recommend in your lambing and kidding toolbox. The other thing that we wanted to start with right away is sterilization and disinfectant materials that you might need. So anytime you're sort of wanting to disinfect pens or boots or whatever, bleach is a good one to have on hand. As far as for the animals, a betadine solution or a chlorhexidine are good antiseptics that you can use to make sure that everything's just clean and you're not spreading disease and that kind of thing among your animals. And I threw this brush in here because one of the things that I think we all get a little bit negligent about sometimes, including myself, these are my boots and you can see they have not been scrubbed, but it's really important, especially during lambing and kidding, to make sure that your coveralls are clean. They don't have a lot of feces and urine and mud and whatever else on them, and your boots as well. So making sure that you are clean when you go between pens. And you also want to start with your most susceptible animals. So go take care of your lambs first and then move into your other pens of critters. Just something to keep in mind. But anyway, this brush is a great tool to put a little chlorhexidine on and scrub your boots. So I just want to throw that up there. All right, Carmen.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about feeding equipment, and mostly that is our feed bunks and hay feeders, salt and mineral feeders. So our feeding equipment should help decrease the risk of any type of disease transmission. And so kind of the goal, especially with sheep and goats, because they're such like nimble feeders and they have those small mouth parts, they can be very selective when they're eating. So you want something that they can still kind of eat the forage, but the forage is not going to be in contact with any other feces, so that they're not having any transmission of worm larvae and things like that. And so these are just a couple examples that Melinda and I have. So there's a sheep feeder that Melinda has a picture of here. This is what is it? It's a fertilizer. This is what fertilizer is sold in, and obviously the fertilizer is not in there, but they have the holes in there about the size of the sheep's face, so they can still reach the hay in there. And then these are a couple pictures of feeders that we have on our farm. This is kind of a bunk feeder that my husband designed for this is mainly what we use for our Nubian goats because it's in our milk pen. And so I don't have the exact dimensions, but if anyone is interested in it, send me an email and I'll get those for you. But it's about neck high on a yearling doe. So most of our young doe, like our kids, can't really reach into this feeder. When we first designed it, you can actually see there's two 2x4s on here, or I think that's a 1x2, maybe not 2x4. But there used to only be one there, and it was low enough that the baby goats could crawl in there, and then they would lay down and poop in the hay, which kind of defeats the purpose of having a bunk feeder. And so we added that second board to increase the height, and so they can't crawl in there, but only the does can get in there to eat. And so that has reduced, any feces getting in there. It's also at a pretty good height that for the most part, they don't back into it and poop in it or anything. So it's kind of at that perfect height where they can still reach in, but they can't poop in it, which is the point, which is kind of the goal. And then we just have these copper, I guess they're not copper, but these pipes above so that they can't crawl through or jump over it. And then up top, we have this picture of a salt and mineral feeder. Again, the main point here is it's off the ground and it's also covered so that you don't get any rain, snow, or, feces in that as well, so that they can still have access to it, but it's always clean. It's really important to have that access to salt and mineral, especially leading up to kidding and lambing, so that they are at a good nutritional level, especially with their minerals. So they don't have any deficiencies leading into parturition and lactation. And then there's another point I was going to make on that. Oh, also with your feed, make sure that you do have good quality feed. Having that tested, I know we've covered that in a few different presentations throughout the year, so look back on those if you have any questions or just need a refresher, but having that tested to make sure that your animals are at their highest nutritional level during this time of year is really important. And so the next slide. And this is another example of some feeders that we have at our house, and you could certainly use these for sheep as well. They're just a covered standing feeder. So again, if anyone is interested, my husband does have, he got the kind of blueprint, I guess, for building these online. And so if anyone wants that, let me know and I can send that to you. Or if there's a lot of interest, I can just share it on the Facebook page so everyone can see it. But these work really well for our boar goats because then they can't get their horns stuck in it with the bunk feeders. We don't really have the boar goats in there. Sorry about that. But they don't use the bunk feeders. They have these instead. Hopefully someone will pick that up. Okay. And then we also have these covered because if you have goats, they don't really like wet feed or wet weather. And so we put covers on these. That was a little bit of an addition to the feeder, but we put covers on these so that they still get up and eat even when it's snowing and raining. Like this morning, it was raining and snowing and really yucky weather. But since they can get under that cover, they still come up and eat, which is important. And if you have llamas, they work for llamas as well. You can see our little llama there. She eats out of it as well. And then in this same pen, we have a few younger, they're not even a year, like young Nubian does, and a few young Bordeaux's. And so for them, we're just feeding on our fence. As you can see here, we just have that hog panel and they can stick their heads through so that the hay isn't in the dirt and they can't trample it. They still have to stick their head through to get to that. And we don't do this a lot, but in this instance we are, just because we have a few of them in there and they're not strong enough to fight our big Bordeaux's out of the feeders. And that is one thing that we've noticed with these standing feeders versus the bunk feeders. There's more pushing and shoving, and just you kind of need a little bit more bunk space actually with the standing feeders than with the bunk feeder, just because they move around a lot more and they push on these feeders. And it also kind of depends on the temperament and just kind of personality of your animals on how they get along together and eating on these. And you can make these kind of as long as you want. So we have the double-sided feeder. You can also make these single-sided and then just feed off of one side and put them in your fence line. We like the double side because I feel like we get more square footage for what we're building. And you can, these ones are 8 foot. We've also made 10 foot, and you could probably make them as long as you want within reason. The big point, which there's not a great picture on here, is on the far side. We put T-post on all 4 corners so they can't push it. And then we use wire and kind of tie them to that T-post, because otherwise when they're pushing on these, especially the really large does, they can kind of move them if they really want to. So next slide. And then this is just some more pictures of these. The downfall of these is that our young goats can crawl up in them, especially with goats. They're more likely to crawl on things than sheep, but they like to lay in them, like this one goat who's taking a little nap. So that's one thing. We do try and clean them out regularly just because they will crawl up there and poop in there. And so we don't want the feed in there. And it happens more, I would say, in the summer, like in this picture. In the winter right now, they're not sleeping in them like they usually are. They're sleeping in the barn. So it's just something to be mindful of, and just make sure to still clean those out so there's no contamination of your feed. Okay, I think next slide.
Should we hit this question really quick before we move forward? Jessica asked if it's okay to feed grain and pellets to does year round or only 30 days before kidding.
It is, I guess it's kind of up to you. We don't feed grain year round because we have good pasture and we have pretty high quality hay. So we don't feel that there is a need for feeding grain year round. We do feed grain. So with our dairy herd, we will feed grain leading up to kidding. And then we continue that obviously after they kid. With our boar herd, we just put them on a really high, like a second or third cutting alfalfa, which is plenty for them. And then depending on how many kids we let them raise, we will give them grain to make sure that they keep up their milk. So we have pretty successfully let most of our boars raise triplets, and we just give them a dairy grain for the, probably after the first week, we'll start them and then taper it up until we wean. So that's just what works for us. And it kind of depends on your animals and what quality of hay and forage you have if you need to feed grain. So I would test your hay and forage, see how much protein and energy is available through that. And then if you need more, supplement.
Yep, and I'd be happy to help balance a ration for your goats if you would like, to make sure that you're not feeding grain when you don't need to. I think
Yeah.
sometimes when you're getting close to the end of gestation and lactation, you sometimes need a little bit of boost, but for the most part, if you have decent quality hay, you shouldn't really need to have to supplement. And it's just a big expenditure that you may not need. So certainly feel free to email one of us and we'll make sure to help you with that question more specific to your operation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say with a lot of people differ in their opinions on letting dams raise, more than a set of twins, like triplets or even quads. And you can talk to Melinda and I on that, but it just kind of depends on the condition of that female and how much milk she can produce. And then, the cost of bottle raising, selling it, or supplementing the doe so that she can feed them all. So the next slide is our birthing stalls and jugs. So these are just a few of our kidding stalls that we have at our house. We have them in an insulated shop. And so my husband is an ag teacher, so we lucked out and they built us these a couple of years ago. They're 4x6s. So they have about, what would that be, 24 square feet in there. We've done 5x5s and 4x6s, and both of them provide enough space for our goats. And we only put them in here for the first 2, sometimes 3 days. And our boar goats maybe only spend 24 hours in this and then they're back outside. We just kind of give them time to, it's more for the kids, give them time to get their legs under them, bond with the mother, and then usually they're fine and we send them back outside. And then this is an example of our heat lamp. We do kid right now. We'll have baby goats in the next week. And so we do use heat lamps. I really like the Premier version because they have the white is encased in that, I don't know, what is the word, Melinda, I'm trying to think of?
It's a little cage or something.
Yeah, the cage. There you go. Yeah. The light is inside of that cage. And so there's not as much risk for it being broken and having any type of, ignition or anything like that. And so we do use lights and they keep the babies warm. We don't use them the whole time, usually the first 24 hours. And our boar goats don't even use them if they're on. And so it's mostly just for the Nubians because they are a little more fragile when they're born. So we use those. And I really like the Premier, that brand. It's very safe. And we try to keep it, you can see we have a metal carabiner on there that attaches to the light. And then we attach that to either twine or I'm trying to think what else we use. Twine or any other type of wire or chain, and then hang it from the ceiling so that it's not attached to the actual panels, because that is kind of a safety concern if it's just attached to the panel. If they hit that panel, it could drop. So we attach ours to the ceiling, or rafters, I guess, in the ceiling to keep it from touching anything else.
Carmen, you had another question about your pipe feeder from the very first slide. Do you have any issues with horns getting stuck in that feeder?
We don't put our boar goats in that pin, so we haven't had any experience with horns getting stuck in that or not. We've considered building it for our boar goats, and if we do, I'll let you guys know how it goes. I think they would be okay. They kind of learn how to move their heads so that their horns don't get stuck. So I don't think it'd be an issue, or you could just move that bar up a little so that they could get their head in and out without getting caught. Okay, and I guess I'm doing this one as well. So this is just an example of some more extensive lambing jugs at the research station. I'm assuming that's where that picture's from. And then
the U.S. Sheep Experiment Station.
Yeah, U.S. Sheep Experiment Station. And then The other thing I wanted to point out is using lime under your bedding to help, that helps with sanitation. It helps keep any type of contaminants kind of out of your kidding and lambing stalls. And so we like this type of lime. It's safe to use around animals. They wouldn't, get sick if they accidentally licked it off the floor a little bit. And so what we usually do is anytime that we go from one animal to the next, we try and keep the stall empty for at least 24 hours. So if there's anything lingering on the walls or the panels, that it kind of has time to die off. And then we put lime down, and then we put shavings and straw. And that's how we bed ours, because then the shavings kind of soak up any, urine or any afterbirth, anything like that, a little bit better than the straw. But then the straw helps keep them pretty warm. And then the last thing I was going to mention is to, especially if you're getting them into a kidding or lambing stall, to try and collect some colostrum. That way, if you need it for the next baby that maybe didn't have as much from its mother, you have that in your freezer or in your fridge, however many you're having, have access to that for your other kids and lambs. So collecting the colostrum, and then definitely freezing it. We try and freeze ours within 24 hours, because if you're not going to use it for that baby after the 24-hour period, but then you have it frozen for the next one if you need it. And the other thing is, even if you're not going to put all of your pairs into a stall or a jug, to still have something in case you have something sick, or you have to separate a baby from its mom because it is injured, or she's not taking it. You still have somewhere to put them where they have a small space where they can be monitored a little closely. So even if you don't need 15 of them for however many you're kidding or lambing, still having a space to put those animals, a designated space, is good.
So a couple of questions. One from Robert. The white pipes in the stalls are the water system for this particular lambing barn. If you go back a couple of weeks now, Dr. Taylor did a webinar for us on shed lambing. So if you want a more in-depth understanding of this particular system, go back to our YouTube channel and watch that. And the other question, Carmen, is can you use diatomaceous earth instead of lime? Which I have no experience with, so.
I don't have any experience with it. We use lime because it's a, I can't even think about it now, but it absorbs the ammonia and things from the urine, and it makes it not smell as bad, and keeps the pins drier. And it just kind of kills off a lot of bacteria. So I don't know if diatomaceous earth does the same thing or not. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. We'll have to do some checking into that. So if you want us to do that for you, shoot us an email, Taylor, and we'll get back to you on that. A question about how long colostrum can last in the freezer. That was one thing I was going to mention in follow up to Carmen's discussion about this slide. Colostrum you usually could keep up to a year in the freezer. Obviously, within the same season is better, but you can use last season's colostrum if you have to in the first few lambs and kids that you have if you need it. The other thing to mention is that to decrease the risk of transmitting new disease into your herd, it's better to try to use your own colostrum or one that is purchased as a colostrum replacer, because if you're using your neighbors or somebody down the road or whatever, there's a chance that you could introduce something into your herd that you don't already have. So it's just something to keep in mind with that. Carmen, Jeff asked if you could give a comparison of concrete versus dirt floors in the jug and lambing pens.
I can't necessarily compare them. I think you can use both. I think with dirt, you just need to make sure to scrape off any feces or anything that got wet from the pear that was in there before. So make sure that it's dry and sanitary. And that goes for both of them with cement as well. Because like you could see in ours, we did have cement flooring. And it works fine. It's actually, I sometimes wish I had a dirt floor, because sometimes if you put them in there, especially really heavy pregnant animals, if you put them in there before they've gone into labor, it can be really hard on them. Like the hardness of the floor is hard on them as a animal. And so that's just one concern. If I wouldn't put them in there very long, because we do have another area where we'll put them in for a few days leading up to their kidding. And sometimes you can tell that they're just a little sore because of how heavy they get, and those floors can be really hard. But you still have to dry out cement floors the same way. And we sometimes have to use fans or not milk heaters, but kind of milk heaters. We use heaters to try and dry out the floors in between putting our pears in there.
Do you have any thoughts about the specific brand or type of lime that people should be looking for?
I just make sure that it's safe around animals. That this is the brand that we use because it's safe around animals, and it's relatively inexpensive. And for this brand, a lot or little goes a long way. So I can usually, we have a loafing shed that our animals, sleep in, obviously. And so if it starts getting wet in there, I'll sprinkle some of this down and then put more straw on top. And I think that it helps keep it a little less smelly, a little less ammonia smelling when I use this. So.
All right. Thanks for all your questions, you guys. This is great to keep it more discussion as we move along.
Mm-hmm.
So this slide is just general health equipment that really you should have in your toolbox year round. But particularly when we're coming up on kidding and lambing season, it's important to make sure that whatever your vaccine program is, that you're having those vaccines on hand when you need them. I like to have this vaccine gun because I can work through all of my ewes in a much more rapid succession. Same goes for any sort of deworming treatment that you want to do in your flock or herd. Here's a drenching gun, same deal. You just plug it right into the bottle of whatever dewormer that you're using. Please don't look at these and say that this is what you should be doing with your flock. You should be consulting your veterinarian and working more specific to your animals and your operation. These are just the ones that I use in my operation, so they're what I had pictures of. Also, it's a good practice to have these latex gloves on hand so that you can just keep any bacteria that you have on your hands from going to your sheep and goats. Unfortunately, for all of us that raise sheep and goats, there's a lot of things that can transmit between humans and sheep and goats, all three ways. So we just have to do our best to try not to give our animals disease or get disease from them or all of that. Also, just have a variety of syringe sizes for various treatments and vaccines and that type of thing that you may need, as well as different sizes of needles. Certainly, some things are a lot thicker, such as maybe an antibiotic or whatever, so you'll need a bigger size needle. But the biggest thing to remember is that our critters are a lot smaller than cattle, so we don't need things that are going to be painful when we use them, right? So appropriate sized needles. And if you're the kind of person that feels comfortable with minor surgery, it never hurts to have a set of surgical tools on hand. Also, I usually keep suture and gauze and other bandaging materials just for minor things that I wouldn't need to call a vet for. Certainly, I'm not suggesting that if you're not comfortable that you should do these things. It's just a suggestion based on your level of comfort. And then, of course, you can work with your vet to get all of these things or to set up protocols for all of these things as well.
Okay, I have a couple questions if you want to take questions.
Sure.
Okay. Well, the first question was from Jennifer. She asked, would concrete with a stall mat still be hard for the does to birth on? And I think it would help. Like a fatigue mat, I think would help. But you'd still have to clean it, so it'd be kind of like everything else. Would you agree with that, Melinda?
Yeah, I don't think it would hurt anything. It certainly would give you more potential for bacteria to live in there. So you just want to make sure that you get it nice and dried out and clean between animals.
Yep. Okay.
As with anything though, the dirt floor or the concrete would go the same way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then the next question was, any suggestions on method of giving vaccines and how to not end up with an abscess? I used new needles for each baby and had bad luck with this last year.
Okay, this is a good question. First and foremost, if you're giving vaccines or any other sort of injection, a couple of ways to be sure that you're doing it right is A, read the bottle and make sure you're injecting in the right place. So for example, intermuscular, you would want to go deeper into the muscle itself, or if it's subcutaneous, you want to make sure you're between the muscle and the skin. Always use a needle that is sharp and doesn't have a barb on it, if that makes sense. And if you can use a new needle for each animal, that's the 100% best way to do it. So especially when you're talking about newborn babies, having a new needle more often is always a good thing. So you're not spreading disease between animals. My rule of thumb is to usually change my needle either when it becomes barbed at the end. So you can always feel that if you run your finger up away from the sharp point, you can feel if it's barbed. Also, every 10 to 15 animals, it never hurts because they do get dull. I mean, they're sharp on the end, but just like a knife, going through the skin will make them dull. So that just helps decrease any sort of extra pain involved and also decrease your chances of abscesses or sharing bacteria or whatever it may be. Also, you always want to give the shot in the neck, whether it's intermuscular or subcutaneous. There's kind of a triangular region on their neck that you would give that injection. Obviously, we don't want abscesses, but if abscesses occur, that's a place where there's less meat that you might get from that animal and that type of thing. So I hope I covered. Carmen, did you think of anything else that we can say about that one?
No, I think that covers it for what I would think of. Yeah. And then we had one more question. They said, do you need an energy block for use?
So that kind of goes back to the same thing we talked about earlier. It's certainly going to depend a little bit on the time of year, I guess, whether the animals are gestating or lactating, or maybe they're not doing anything. And it's going to depend a lot on what else you're feeding them. So we've done a couple of nutrition talks in the last year that you can find on our YouTube channel and our Facebook page as well, if you want to go back and review those. The thing that I always recommend is to get your hay tested for nutrient content, and that'll give you a good idea of where you stand nutritionally. And then also understanding what your animals need at different periods of their cycle. Obviously, as they're gestating and going into lactation, they need more energy and more protein to support the fetus and the milk. So it's dependent on what else you're feeding them. And I'm, again, happy to look at your specific operation and help you balance the right ration for your animals. The one thing I would recommend always is to have some kind of mineral supplement. But again, it's important to know where you stand nutritionally to make sure that you're giving them the most appropriate mineral package. So I'm always going to say, get your feeds tested, and then I'm happy to work with you to make sure that you're meeting all of your nutrient requirements. And then if you need that energy block, that's when it's appropriate. So whether or not we're going to be talking about intraperitoneal dextrose, we are going to get to some of the things that you might encounter during lambing and kidding here shortly for those types of things. So if we don't answer your question when we get there, ask again, Valerie. Is it bad for does and ewes to be administered antibiotics prior to parturition? You know, it's something that we can do, and I cannot honestly give you an answer for all the different kinds of antibiotics, whether they're safe for gestation or not. So that would be something that you would want to work with your vet, and they would be able to tell you. That's probably also something that you could do an internet search on the specific antibiotic just to be sure. This question about I was told not to feed grain until after birth. Should I follow that advice? There's nothing wrong with grain prior to parturition. But again, it may not be necessary if you're feeding really good quality alfalfa hay or something like that. So I would definitely, again, just check into what your nutritional status is on the feeds that you're giving them. And I usually, in the last 2 to 3 weeks before I'm ready to start lambing, will start supplementing with some grain. But it's how much is dependent on how good a quality my hay is leading into that. So, but particularly if you do any sort of preg checking and you know that you're having twins, triplets, quadruplets, whatever, obviously those animals are going to need more because they're trying to support more offspring. So sometimes that's the benefit to doing preg checking, ultrasound preg checking. Any more, Carmen? The question about where do you get hay tested? We have worked with Ward Laboratories several times for our webinar series. They're out in Nebraska. Rebecca works there. She was a person that I went to grad school with, and also Carmen knows pretty well. So we work with her. Any of the feed analysis places are probably fine. It's just a matter of, you know, finding the one that's the most economical for you. So we can certainly hook you up with somebody if you would like. Okay, so just a couple of things about equipment you might need prior to lambing. We have this prolapse harness. So if you have any ewes that are prone to prolapse prior to lambing, ewes or does, you can use this setup to hold everything in until she lambs or kids. This is also a uterine spoon that will hold the prolapse in. These are things that are never bad to have on hand, but I would recommend if your animals have this problem at some point that they should be culled as well as their offspring, because prolapse is genetic, and so you can pass that along, and it's always kind of problematic, especially as you come close to lambing and kidding, because you can't really push a baby through this thing. So you have to be really cognizant of when these animals are getting ready to have their offspring and make sure that that thing gets pulled off in time. So it's never the best case scenario, but it still doesn't hurt because it does happen to have these pieces of equipment on hand. For those of you who have wool sheep, I always recommend to do a little bit of crutching, which is shearing around the vulva and around the udder so that the lambs have better access when they are born. So this is my setup for shearing, and you can, if you just have a few animals, you could probably just use a regular razor for what you need to do, but it's important to do that, especially if you have a really woolly set of ewes. These are a couple of things that just make life a little easier for you if you're not somebody that has the shearing technique down. This would be a stand that you can catch their heads and be able to do the crutching on here. Or this little, I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on what they call these, but just a little hammock that you can set them back in. And sheep and goats have really weak abdominal muscles. So once they're kind of set back on their butt, they have a hard time going anywhere. So that's pretty handy for stuff like that. The other thing is pregnancy toxemia can happen to both overweight ewes and does or underweight. So what happens is it's basically a metabolic issue where the kids and lambs are taking up more energy than the ewe has, and she goes into sort of a imbalance of energy. And so this Nutri-Drench, which there's other brands out there, this is just the one that I use, you can use as a high energy drench to help some of those ewes and does that are sort of struggling towards the end of gestation, just to get their energy up. And there's some vitamins and minerals in there as well. This can be used on both the dam and the lambs and kids if you're getting kind of a slow start with them, or if they had a rough parturition, give it to both mom and kids. And vitamin B complex also kind of promotes just a better go. So these are two things that you really can't overuse. I mean, certainly you can overuse them to the point where you're wasting money, but they're things that are really good tools to have and highly recommended coming into lambing and kidding. Okay, I'm going to pause for some questions.
Do you want me to read these?
Oh yeah, sorry, you're back.
So the first question was, if giving, or I guess it's just a comment, if giving those veterinary chemicals pre-kidding, you need to consider withholding periods for the progeny and colostrum, which is a good point, especially if you're using any type of antibiotic that would have a withdrawal period. And then the second question was, can incidence of prolapse be related to tail length and calcium levels?
Definitely tail length can play a role if, especially with ewes, because you would dock their tails. If they're docked too short, then you would get a rectal prolapse, which is different than a vaginal or a uterine prolapse. So a lot of times where you'll see problems would be show lambs and that type of thing where their tail is docked really close. You'll get rectal prolapses, and that's less genetic as it is just the tail being too short. The tail has nothing to do with a vaginal or a uterine prolapse though. And although I've never really thought too much about calcium playing a role, it certainly could. Calcium plays a really big role in muscle function in any animal. And so certainly some of those muscles could be weakened by low calcium levels, I'm sure. That probably wouldn't be something that you could fix by giving them more calcium. So it's just something that, unfortunately, if you are seeing that in your animals, they're likely to have it happen again. And they are also likely to pass it on to their female offspring. So it's just good practice to get rid of those critters after the season is over.
Okay. Then we had one more question. It says, how long before lambing do you recommend working ewes?
So this is going to depend a lot on what your vaccination protocols are. Obviously, as you're coming close to kidding and lambing, you don't want to put a lot of extra stress on your animals. If you work your animals pretty regularly and they work really quiet and it's not really a big deal, you can work them at any point, really. We did have a discussion a couple weeks back about vaccine protocols and at what point you should be giving those vaccines, which I would recommend going back and watching that to get a good idea of where you should be at from that standpoint. But I usually will work mine anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks prior to lambing and kidding, and I don't have any trouble with that. So mine is primarily, I do give a vaccine before I lamb, but I also have liver flukes in my flock, so I treat for those, which is 2 to 3 doses at 6 to 8 week intervals. So that's why I do that. But is that it for questions?
Yep, that's it for now.
Okay. All right, so discussing, the point comes where you have a ewe or a doe that is needing some help with lambing or kidding. Here are just a handful of tools that will make your life easier at that point and also decrease chances of infections and disease transmission and that type of thing. So first and foremost, you want to have that betadine solution or chlorhexidine at this point, because it's important to make sure that you're sort of disinfecting back there when she's getting ready to need assistance. So typically what you can do, always have kind of a stainless steel bucket. This is the, I mean, it doesn't have to be stainless steel. It's just something that was recommended to me and that I recommend. These things clean up really well. You can be sure that they don't have any bacteria, like in a plastic bucket, you would maybe have risk of that kind of thing if it got dirty or whatever. So one of two options would be put some warm water in this bucket and then take one of these two solutions and just sort of clean up around the vulva. And you can either use a gloved hand to sort of rub it in and then pour water over to rinse it off, or you can use a rag of some kind, a clean one, just to get everything cleaned up back there so you're not inserting your hand and dragging bacteria with it. The other thing would be to have these OB gloves because, of course, as most of you know, if you've ever assisted a ewe or a doe, you can go well past your elbow at times. So those OB gloves go clear up to your shoulder. So OB glove first. We usually recommend that you turn it inside out so the seam is not rubbing up against anything in your animal. And then add one of these latex gloves on top of the OB glove to kind of hold everything in place. One thing to mention though, when you're cleaning up before you go in to assist, use one glove to clean and get everything good to go, and then change gloves when you go in so that you're as clean as you can be, and you're not going to be transmitting anything off of you into her or anything off of her into her that might cause issues down the road. Sheep and goats, unfortunately, are really susceptible to uterine infections, and so it's just really important to try to keep everything as clean as possible. And of course, if you're going to be sticking your arm up there, she would appreciate a little bit of lube. So that's important to have on hand as well. The other thing to remember is if she defecates or urinates while you're in the process of doing this, don't stick your hand up there with feces or urine on it. Change the glove at that point. Here on the left, some of the things that would be helpful to you with either assisting with lambing and kidding, or if you have an issue with mothering or the lambs and kids won't suckle or whatever it is, having a head catch of some kind could be really helpful so that you can do it alone, for one. But for two, then she can't fight you as bad, and it's a lot more successful that way. The other way that you can do that, instead of purchasing or building a head catch, a simple method that I use all the time is having a gate swinging from the corner of a pen, and you face her into that corner and you pull that gate around behind her, and you've got, like a chain or something that you can bring around. Oh, I'm sorry. Underneath her butt, so that it kind of holds her in place, so you can work without having to fight with her. And this is a really low cost way to make sure that you have some place to catch them. This works well for assisting with lambing and kidding dystocias, or even just helping lambs suckle or whatever it may be. And honestly, even for treatment, if you have one animal that you need to catch and treat, that's pretty handy. So how are we doing, Carmen? Any questions?
Nope, none so far.
Awesome. All right, your turn.
Okay, so this is some of our lamb and kid support equipment. So I'll kind of start on the left-hand side and go across. So obviously we have our colostrum replacers. If you have a female that goes through kidding or lambing and unfortunately doesn't have any milk, you still need to get colostrum into that baby. And so these are a couple of replacers that can work pretty well for that purpose. And also some electrolytes if they are really struggling and seem very dehydrated. Those can be used as well to kind of get them a good start, as well as some of the things that Melinda recommended earlier that I will kind of skip over in the essence of time. And then, so this is just a picture of colostrum. After it is milked, we usually store our colostrum in a jar in the fridge, just because it's more sanitary than, plastic containers or Tupperwares or something like that you could put it in. And it's also easier because colostrum's pretty thick. To me, it's easier to kind of stir it in that and heat it up versus, putting it in a plastic bottle. But when you do freeze it, we freeze ours. You can buy these at, Walmart or the grocery store. They're little plastic bags for nursing mothers. So when they pump their milk and they want to store that as well, they're really nice because they have the measurements on the bag, so you can freeze them in 2 to 3 to 4 ounce quantities, which for sheep and goats, for kids and lambs, that's the quantity that you're going to want to freeze it in, because you only want to thaw out exactly what you need, so you're not wasting something or thawing it out and then leaving it in the fridge. Especially colostrum. We usually freeze our colostrum in 2 to 3 ounce quantities, so we just pull out what we need, so that we're not pulling out half a gallon bag of colostrum and only using 12 to 15 ounces of it, because you're only going to use that colostrum for the first 24 to 48 hours. So that's a point there. And then we have this is how we heat up our milk at my house. We put it in a pot on the stove, and we put a thermometer in it, and you heat it to 101 degrees. And that's really important those first few weeks, because you don't want to put cold milk into those little babies, because that's cold milk and it's going to be hard for them to digest it when it's cold. And so you want it the temperature that it would be if they were nursing their mother. And it's also important that the baby itself is 101 degrees, so that they're not too cold in their system, kind of sluggish when you start feeding them. They need to be able to digest and use what you're feeding them. So they need to be at a good 101 degree temperature. And I have a chart of bottle feeding amounts that I'll also share on the Facebook page, so you guys can look at it if you do have to end up bottle feeding. But in general, so for like a 10-pound baby when they're born, they would be consuming about 24 ounces, which is about 15% of their body weight per day. And that would be divided across, however many feedings you have. So if they're those first few days, you're going to be feeding them about every 2 hours. And then you can move it to about every 4 hours, but you want to kind of mimic what they would be getting from their mom, especially those first few crucial days. And so if we have to pull a kid at birth, we will be feeding them every 2 days for about the first every 2 hours, sorry, for the first 2 days. Then after that, you can kind of push it to every 4 hours and 6 hours as they get older. And so then we have some pictures of lamb and kid milk replacer. These nurse buckets, which work really well after they're trained to nurse off of an artificial nipple. Those work really well, especially if you have a lot that you're feeding. And then we also keep our bottles in oven mitts, or you can use pop koozies or beer koozies to keep those bottles warm so that by the time that you heat it up in the house, take it outside, wrestle them into wherever you're going to feed them, that the milk is still warm and it hasn't cooled down too much. And then Melinda has pictures. She purchased this bottle warmer off of Amazon, and it works pretty well for her to get her bottles warm without having to heat it up on the stove. So if you have a barn that's, far away from your house, maybe that would work really well to get your bottles up to temperature. And then these are just a couple other examples of different bottles that you can use and the nipples that you can use. With these yellow and red nipple attachments, they're really touchy on how you cut open the nipple for nursing, and especially with newborn goat. That's my experience is newborn goats. You don't want it to flow out of that too fast, or you'll almost kind of drown them. And so you have to be really careful in how you cut those. And I can try and share that with anybody that needs it. You kind of have to cut them. You don't just snip off the top. You kind of cut into it. That way it still kind of opens and closes. So they actually have to learn to nurse, and it's not just spraying all over their face, because then you end up wasting half of your milk. And then here's some different bottle cleaning tools and mixers. And my advice with bottles is we like to use water bottles. That way, after about 5 days, you can just throw them away and get a new one. So you don't have to wash them so much. I think that's all I have for that.
Okay. Carmen, did you mention the esophageal tube?
Yes. And so I guess over on the left-hand side, that's an esophageal tube. If you have to tube a baby goat or lamb, be very careful with these. Make sure that it goes down the esophagus and into the stomach. You do not want to accidentally get that through the trachea and into the lungs, because that would kill them if you put milk into their lungs, obviously. And so you have to be very careful with those and ensure that they are in the esophagus.
One thing that I'll add to this slide, and there was a question on this as well. So Elizabeth, I'm answering your question. With kids and lambs, it's very important when you're doing any kind of replacer, including milk to replacer, that you use sheep or goat, because they require a lot higher fat and protein content than like a cow or a calf would. So it's really important to use lamb and goat specific things like milk replacer, colostrum replacer. This is honestly the only one that I've found that I think would be a really good option. This it's a Land O'Lakes product, and it is a colostrum replacer. It's not a colostrum supplement. It's also specific for sheep and goats. You can get a lot of different kinds of colostrum replacer that are specific for cattle, which worst case scenario, use that. Cattle, they need the colostrum. So that's really important. But if at all possible, get one that's sheep and goat specific, and it's a replacer rather than a supplement. So just keep that in mind. Jessica asked a question about an alternative to the Nutri-Drench. The first ingredient is propylene glycol. So yes, there are other options, I'm sure. This is just the one that was recommended to me by my vet. The reason that these are really important, especially if you're using them for lambs and kids that are really struggling when they're first born, or using does with pregnancy toxemia is because the propylene glycol is a very simple sugar. And so what happens is you give it orally and it goes into their gut and it gets absorbed right away. So it doesn't have a chance to move through the digestive system, to be taken by the fetus that she may be carrying. And so what it does is it's just like a super shot of energy that'll help them be able to get through and finish gestating. In a really serious scenario, you may need to call your vet to do early intervention as far as inducing labor or cesarean if it gets really bad. But this is something that works really well if you catch pregnancy toxemia early, and also if you dose those weak lambs, or if they get cold, or if it's just a great way to get energy into them that absorbs right away and doesn't have to be digested, if that makes sense. Carmen, one of the comments here was that ice cube trays are also good for freezing colostrum and then putting them into a Ziploc bag. That's a great idea.
Yeah, that is a good idea. And I think we should have had it on this slide, but also a small kitchen scale is really important when you're feeding these small amounts. We have a kitchen scale and we'll just tear the bottle with a funnel and pour until it's 2.3 ounces or whatever we need to feed. But I think the freezing would be in the ice tray would be a good way to do that too. So
okay. So I guess just to specify, Emily mentioned giving a baby milk, but it wasn't immediately after birth. Make sure that they get colostrum in the first 12 hours. It helps make sure they stay warm. It helps make sure that they have enough energy to survive, but it also helps with those antibodies that they might pick up from the colostrum. It helps make sure they have enough energy to get going right off the bat. Once you hit that 12 to 24 hour range and you've got plenty of colostrum in them, then it's time to just switch to a milk replacer or just regular milk from another ewe. And at that point, like Carmen said, just look at the chart she's going to post and that'll help you know how often to feed and how much to feed at each feeding. And the biggest thing for me when I have lambs that, especially if the dam will still take care of them, but maybe she doesn't have milk or whatever it is, I like to get them on this bucket as soon as I can. That usually can happen in the first 3 or 4 days. You can start getting them to suckle on the bucket. That allows them to just suckle whenever they're hungry, and that helps. It decreases your workload as long as you make sure they have milk available all the time. But it also helps them get a better start because they can eat when they're hungry rather than just gorging on whatever you give them. This question is, what about milk replacer that's soy based? Carmen, have you experienced with that?
I have not, because we just use goat's milk from our goats.
Yeah.
So I would say you would not want to use a soy-based milk replacer. I would use something that is from a mammal. So yeah, I would try and get a milk replacer that has, dairy proteins, not soy.
Yeah.
And
I
then,
think soy would probably tend to cause some gut upset. It probably wouldn't be the best option.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I don't think it would be as high, energy value and things like that. So then the other question, do they not have a tendency to overeat? I would say with bottle feeding goats and lambs, definitely make sure that they have a CDT vaccination. If you don't pre-vaccinate your females, vaccinate them when they're a day old, to help prevent any Clostridium production, and prevent that overeating disease. I would say if you are putting them on like a bucket where they could self-feed, to monitor that. Usually if they start on that, they won't overeat. They'll learn to, eat when they're hungry and stop when they're full. If they are being bottle fed and then you just all of a sudden introduce a bucket and you're not monitoring that bucket, they can overeat off of the bucket, because when they're bottle fed, they will always be hungry because you don't want to, you don't want to engorge them on a bottle. And so with ours, we always make sure that their stomach is not too full. Like we just kind of push on their belly and make sure that it's not, like, you don't want them to be like a balloon, you want to leave them a little bit hungry so that you're not I don't know how to explain it correctly, but you're not overfilling the system so that they can actually digest it all and it doesn't all just come out in diarrhea. So,
yeah. So a couple of specifics that are popping up in questions. I'm just going to give an overview that covers all of them, hopefully. When you're bottle feeding lambs, especially in the first couple days, yes, you have to feed through the night. And unfortunately, that means every 2 hours, you go out and you feed. And you really should, for the best start for that animal, you really should feed on the recommended scale, meaning that for the first few days, every 2 hours, and then you can back it off to every 4 hours, but you really should through the night be feeding them that way. Also, when you switch them to a bucket, this is a really handy way to make sure that they're getting milk whenever they want it, and they would be eating more naturally, like if they had a mom that was feeding them. When you first go to start them on a bucket, especially if it's early, you want to use the same nipple that you were using on the bottle that you were feeding them from so that they know where to find it. You still have to go out there and stand with them until you know that they're eating off of it, and you kind of watch, and once they start gravitating to it on their own, then you're probably fine, and then you can monitor how much milk is being taken away from the bucket through a time period. But it really is stand out there, hold them, make sure they're suckling for a while off of that bucket. The other thing is start with warm milk. As they get the hang of that bucket, you can start switching them to colder milk. And honestly, once they're eating normally after a week or two, cold milk is fine. The biggest thing with the warm milk when they're young is they don't digest it as well when it's cold. And they also, their body temperature will drop if you feed them cold milk. So that's really important. And it's just kind of hoping they take to it, but they don't all always take to the bucket. So the other thing is keeping your ewes and does out of the bucket. So you want to have some kind of top. If it's warm where you are, you want to make sure you put like a frozen water bottle or something in there to keep it from growing bacteria. There's a lot of things that you have to be cognizant of if you're going to do a milk bar.
I see Melissa's question. We gave our ewes CDT 4 to 6 weeks before lambing. We're going to give lambs at 10 weeks. I would say as long as you give your tetanus shot before you do any banding of tails or like castration, you're okay. But I would make sure that they have a tetanus shot before banding the tail or banding for castration, just because when you do band, there's always a risk of tetanus entering their system, and CDT has tetanus in it. We always give tetanus before, so we pre-vaccinate our does, and then we usually disbud before they're 10 days old. And so, and if we are concerned that they weren't vaccinated, we'll give tetanus before we disbud, because disbudding is also another, anytime that I think of it as anytime that you're introducing any type of not open wound, but kind of open skin, to make sure that they have that tetanus protection before that. So
yeah, that's really important anytime you're banding or cutting or whatever.
Yeah.
Also.
I think.
And actually just the injection can cause that as well. So having that tetanus is important.
For most of them.
There's a question about making sure that your bottle babies don't succumb to barber pole worms and coccidia. That they had given them CD&T and valbazen and it didn't work clearly. My thing would be, if you're seeing issues like that, you need to get their fecal fecal sample tested on those lambs and make sure that what you're deworming for is actually what they have, and specify the dewormer to the type of worm that they have. And coccidia, unfortunately, we did do a webinar last week on coccidia. Feel free to watch that. It was very in-depth and it was a great conversation about how to manage coccidia. So I would recommend watching that because coccidia can be really tough. Okay, so we're gonna move on, but who's next?
I think this is you. So we only have about 3 slides left.
Yeah.
Just so you guys know.
Yeah. So Carmen, if you see any more questions, let me know, but otherwise I'll move on. This slide is specific to any lambs or kids that get cold and are not doing well right off the bat. Or in this picture, actually, this lamb was about a week old and he fell in the stock tank. So what you do when they're cold is, first and foremost, like we talked about in the first slide, take a temperature, listen to their heart rate, breathing, that type of thing, just see where you're at. If the temperature is 99 degrees or lower in a lamb or kid, you need to intervene immediately because they won't survive. The primary thing that you can do when they're that cold is to put them in a big basin sink and put some lukewarm water in there, just, not hot water, not warm water, just warmer than their body temperature by a degree or two, and just hang on to them in that sink until they get warm, and you can start adding warmer water. That thermometer that Carmen showed with the when she was warming up milk works great to help you make sure that your water is the right temperature, but get that lamb or kid submerged in warmer water, get his body temperature up. The other thing you can do is build or purchase one of these warming boxes. Those are really handy as well. It's not as quick as the submerged in water scenario, but it will do the trick. Also, clean towels, throw them in the dryer, wrap them up in warm, dry, freshly dried towels, hair dryer. Heat lamps are not warm enough if they are that cold to bring them back, but they are warm enough that once they're back to a normal body temperature, to let them kind of bake a little bit before you stick them back out and get fully warmed up. Another thing that I use a lot of times is a heating pad. So make sure you put a towel over the top of it so it doesn't burn their skin, but that's a great way to help them stay warm. And I also have a little bathroom with a cadet heater. I just crank that sucker all the way up, put a heating pad, and it doesn't take long to get them warmed up. But don't put them in a scenario where you're going to burn them. That's really important because that's not going to help matters at all. Carmen, I think you were going to run with this page first.
So this is just some of the lamb and kid processing equipment. I'll go over really quick. So we have our banding tool. So this is for either banding of the testicles or banding of tails to use there. Here we have on the bottom is disc budding. For the goat people that are interested in that, I can share what we've purchased. So we have a disc budding iron. It's a hot iron that we hold on to the horn bud, obviously. A box, which my husband is sitting on, that holds the kids still, which is really great. It keeps them more comfortable and you more comfortable, so you're only focused on the horn buds. And then we use, it's called a fight back. It's a cooling antiseptic spray that is actually for, its purpose is for mastitis, but it works really, really good for disc budding. We just spray that onto the burn, like where we've burned the horn bud off after we've held it down. And it has a cooling sensation, so it makes the kids much more comfortable as well. And it's worked awesome for us the past 3 or 4 years that we've used it. And then we have a handheld scale. This is really handy, especially if you're bottle feeding. You can get an accurate weight on your kids and lambs so that you know how much you should be feeding them. And then we have just some betadine solution to use on, if you're well, first you should probably use it on their navel after they're born. And then if there's any open wounds that need treated, you can use that as well. And then we have some sheep branding fluids, those irons, taggers. I think most of us probably understand what those are used for and how to use them. And then this lamb and kid paste. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that, Melinda?
Nope. The lemon kid paste, just for anybody who doesn't know, is kind of a probiotic. It helps get their gut going. So when you are processing, especially if it's within the first day or two, it never hurts to give them a little dose of it. It's like a probios that you would use in calves, if you're familiar with that. Okay. So this is our last page. It's not all inclusive or very specific, just a handful of things that you might consider to have on hand. If you're comfortable doing IV fluids, you can keep those on hand. Even just under the skin IV fluids sometimes will make a difference in certain scenarios, but I wouldn't recommend it unless you're trained in how to deal with it. So contact your vet. If you have issues with coccidiosis, you can keep some kind of coccidiostat or something on hand. Again, go back to last week's webinar on coccidiosis management. Also, if you have commonly anything that you need to treat for, it's always good to have antibiotics on hand. But again, it's going to be specific to what the problem is and how you work with your vet to get it. This calcium gluconate is one that if you have any issues with milk fever, particularly maybe if you're having dairy animals or that kind of thing, you can dose them with that to get their calcium levels back up. And Carmen, you were going to talk about the bag balm.
Yeah, so we keep bag balm on hand because we have obviously dairy goats, and so sometimes their udders can get pretty chapped, especially when they're just starting to freshen. And if it's cold, dry weather like this, they can get chapped pretty easily. So we always keep bag balm on hand and put in those dry areas to help them be more comfortable. Also with, especially in our first fresheners, we sometimes get hard congested udders. It's not always mastitis. If it's hot, it can usually indicate mastitis. So you should have that tested. But if it's just kind of a hard congested udder, usually that's just some type of, congestion within the udder. And so if we have what's called udder mint, I can share that as well for people. But if you put that on the udder and rub it on the entire udder and kind of do a massage, that can help relieve some of that congestion and increase circulation to get the milk flowing for them to milk or nurse their kids. And so I can share that for anybody that's interested.
Okay, so that was the end of our presentation. Here's our email addresses for any questions we don't get to, or if you guys think of anything later. Marty, your suggestion of adding vegetable oil to increase fat content to cow's milk for sheep and goats, I personally would rather just use something specific for kids and lambs. Introducing any sort of vegetable material could potentially cause some gut upset, but if this is something that you have heard from somebody that has experience with it, I'm just not sure, I guess, how much that would be helpful compared with just going to a kid and lamb supplement. We band our tails on our lambs at 7 days old and vaccinate with CD&T at 4 weeks. Is this too late? I personally think that you should be giving the CD&T at the same time that you're banding, because anytime, like Carmen said, that you're exposing or making sores like you would with a band, you are opening yourself up to tetanus, and CD&T will cover that tetanus issue. So if you watch back at Dr. Taylor's vaccination webinar, he recommended that if the ewes were not vaccinated prior to lambing and they got colostrum, that you would want to wait till 7 days to vaccinate, but that would be when you would want to do it if it's a new vaccination for those lambs. So I would say as soon as you're banding, go ahead and just hit them with that vaccine at the same time.
So,
Carmen, do you want to take the one about pain relief during disbudding?
Yeah. So what about pain relief when disbudding? And then they asked about meloxicam. We do not give any pain relief when disbudding. We don't use lidocaine or anything like that. I know some people do. And we also disbud with our boar goats. We'll disbud when they're 3 days old if we are disbudding them. We only disbud our male boar goats that aren't going to be used for breeding. And for the most part, I think it's easier just to burn the buds, spray that cooling spray on, and they go back to their mom and they're just fine. It's probably a preference. And if you're taking them to a veterinarian, they might give them lidocaine if that's their procedure. And if they're being disbudded at a larger, when the horn is actually a horn, not just a bud, you might need to use pain relief then. But we don't use it because we've disbed at a young age and we haven't had any issues with that. Yeah, if they're 8 days old today, if you're doing it yourself, I would not worry about using any pain relief, but that's kind of a personal preference. And then we had a question. I have you carrying triplets. How much milk do you advise we give the lambs? We want to avoid having a bottle lamb if possible. I guess I would just make sure that they're all getting fed, especially with triplets. Sometimes females will kind of reject one of them or even two in some triplet scenarios. So just keep an eye on them, make sure that they're all being fed. And as far as how much should they be getting, it depends on their weight. And the biggest thing is usually they can feed them for the first week, but after that first week, you really have to make sure that they're all still getting fed and there's not one that's going to end up being a runt. And that's something that we watch for. So supplementing that ewe before she kids as well is really important. Or before she lambs. Sorry, getting on my
One of the best ways to make sure that lambs are being fed is if you have concerns about somebody, just weigh them once a day. And as long as they're gaining weight, you know they're getting fed. If they're not gaining, then they're going to need some supplement. The one thing we never really touched on today that I think could be really helpful, especially in a scenario like that, is to provide creep feed for the lambs, which is just a protein and energy supplement pellet. And the lambs aren't going to eat it in the first week or two, but once they are old enough to eat solid feeds, what you want to do is make sure you have a creep pen, essentially. So what it is smaller slats that the lambs and kids can go into, but the adults cannot. And that'll really help a lot if you're going to do stuff like having the ewes carry their triplets or to feed all of their triplets and everything. I personally don't recommend having ewes keep all three, just because it's oftentimes, like Carmen said, one of them is not going to be getting what they need, and it's going to be one that she selects isn't going to be getting what it needs. So if you're going to do that, just make sure they're gaining weight and make sure they have access to something like a creep feed so that they can help supplement themselves, and even train them to one of those milk bars so that if they need a little bit of supplement, they can just go get it as they need it.
And we have like 2 more questions that we'll answer, and then we're just going to shut it down. And if you have questions, email us or chat with us on the Facebook page. The first one was giving lambs every 2 hours was applicable for only bottle lambs, correct? Yes, that is correct. They only need to be fed every 2 hours for those first 2 days. And then otherwise keep an eye on them, make sure that they're getting adequate from their mother. Yeah, and honestly, I guess you don't have to make sure that they get up every 2 hours. If they're with their mother, they will probably be getting up and nursing as frequently as they need to. But do make sure that they're not lethargic and they are getting up, but you don't have to wake them up every 2 hours. And then the last question was, we pasture raise kids and lambs. Recently kept some weaned ewes for replacements. What should I feed them and for how long until they thrive on pasture and hay? I feel like we've had some nutrition conversations on that.
Yeah, I think the biggest question there, April, if you can pop the answer in real quick, is how old they are right now. If they are 2 to 3 months at least old right now, they'll be fine on pasture and hay. So as long as they're eating solid food and are weaned off of if they're weaned at an appropriate age off of their mothers, then they should be fine. Lambs usually start eating solid foods within the first week or two of their lives. And usually by the time they hit, at the very earliest, probably 6 to 8 weeks old, they can survive on their own. It's not ideal, but they can. So I think they'd be fine. You can certainly still supply some grower or a creep feed or whatever if you're concerned about making sure that they do well. But again, if you want to get in touch with me and I can help you make sure that whatever feed you're giving them is appropriate for what they need. So I'm happy to do that for you. Oh, they're 4 months old, she said. So yeah, I think they'd be fine. If it's supporting the other sheep in your flock, then it should be fine for them too. So. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We are not going to have a webinar for the next 2 weeks because of the holidays. So we will miss you. We have enjoyed you all year. It's been a great year. And we've really been happy with the turnout. You guys have been a great audience. So again, anytime you think of something that we can help you with, shoot us an email. We can get it on a webinar or help you individually. And I guess have happy holidays and hopefully you guys get some family time, and here's to a smooth lambing and kidding season. Thanks, Carmen.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.